Every time your dog pulls its lips back to snarl over like a stolen sock, right?
Hmm.
Or wags its tail when you walk through the door, it's actually executing this piece of biological software that took, well, millions of years to claim.
Yeah, exactly. It's deep programming.
Right. And we see these behaviors every single day, so we just assume we understand the operating system.
Yeah.
But what happens if you travel to the dense forests of Southeast Asia, find a completely different wild canid, and discover its biological code has a totally different operating system?
Well, it basically forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew about that animal sleeping at the foot of your bed.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is the beauty of comparative ethology.
Okay, let's unpack this
Yeah.
because you and I are doing a deep dive today into some incredible source material about wild canines. And the mission here for you listening is that to understand the dog in your living room, we actually have to ignore them for a while.
Yeah, we really do. Because we're so used to observing domestic dogs in this highly artificial environment, our living rooms, backyards, city parks, that we suffer from a massive observation bias.
Right, like we look at a golden retriever on a couch and think, oh, I know you. You're just a wolf that learned to love central heating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to actually decode why a dog acts the way it does, observing them in a human environment is, honestly, it's terrible science.
It totally masks their true biology.
It does. It really does. So we have to look at their wild, distant, and frankly, sometimes bizarre cousins outside the direct Canis family, which is the core mission of our deep dive today. Ethology is the study of animal behavior under natural conditions.
Hmm.
But the comparative aspect, that's where the scientific breakthroughs happen.
Right, because by looking at these distant relatives, animals that share a common ancestor with dogs but took completely different evolutionary paths millions of years ago, we can start to isolate the variables.
Exactly. We figure out, okay, which behaviors are universal canine traits, which are specifically needed for surviving as a pack hunter, and which are just the strange physical side effects of being domesticated by humans.
Right. So if you're listening, think of this deep dive as the ultimate guide to social dynamics, teamwork, and communication. It's almost like looking at the different cliques in a giant wild high school to figure out why your best friend acts the way they do.
That's a great way to look at it, because if we want to understand how our pet dogs evolved to integrate into our human families, which are our specific social units, we have to start by looking at the most extreme, high-stakes version of teamwork on the planet.
And that means we are starting with the African wild dog.
Like
Yep.
Caron Pictus, right?
Yes, the African wild dog. If you want to study highly developed social behavior, they're the absolute gold standard. I mean, they share fundamental similarities with wolves and domestic dogs, but the intensity of their pack dynamics is dialed up to a level that is, well, it's almost difficult to comprehend. And that intensity, it's born entirely out of necessity, isn't it? Like if we look at their environment and their prey, they don't have the luxury of being independent.
Not at all.
Right, because they specialize in hunting massive prey. We're talking antelopes, wildebeests, zebras.
Yeah, animals that are significantly faster and infinitely more powerful than any individual wild dog.
Exactly. I mean, a single African wild dog attempting to take down a zebra is just, it's a mathematical impossibility. It would result in immediate injury or, death.
Right. Evolution has forced them to function less like a group of individuals and more like a single, highly synchronized biological machine. Their hunting strategy is this exhaustive relay system.
Oh, yeah, the relay system is wild to read about.
It really is. They run prey to the point of absolute physical collapse. And that requires individuals to seamlessly cycle in and out of the lead position, constantly communicating while sprinting at top speed.
It's basically the most intense, high-stakes school group project ever, right? Where everyone must do their exact part perfectly or literally nobody eats.
That's exactly what it is.
But anytime you have a system that relies entirely on seamless cooperation, you introduce the risk of a total systemic collapse if the individuals don't get along. So my question is, if they are so intensely reliant on each other, how do they handle the inevitable social friction? Like, do they ever just argue?
Oh, they definitely have friction. But the way they manage it is incredibly sophisticated. And it relies heavily on their acoustic ecology.
Okay, acoustic ecology. Break that down for us.
Sure. So you would intuitively think that an animal labeled a wild dog would use a deep, booming bark to coordinate over the vast savanna.
Right. Yeah, you'd picture this aggressive, loud barking.
Exactly. But their primary vocalizations are entirely different.
Our sources point this out, and I thought it was such a brilliant detail. When they get excited or they need to communicate across the pack, they squeak.
They squeak, yes.
Like they emit these high-pitched bird-like twitters and whines. It doesn't sound like a dog at all.
No, it doesn't. And it's a profound acoustic adaptation.
Hmm.
Because in the animal kingdom, a deep, low-frequency bark carries a tremendous amount of aggressive weight,
Right.
like a confrontational wavelength. But squeaking, twittering, whining, those operate on a completely different frequency, both literally and psychologically. They are highly affiliative, submissive sounds.
So they're biologically designed to diffuse tension.
Exactly. Now, they do have the physical capacity to produce a short bark, but it is reserved strictly for specific acute alarm situations, like, say, spotting a lion.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's not their everyday social language.
So they're essentially engineering their communication to eliminate aggression from the very start.
Precisely. And this acoustic strategy, it's just one component of a much larger mechanism to maintain social cohesion,
Hmm.
which is most evident in their pre-hunt greeting ceremony.
Ah, yes. The pre-hunt pep rally.
Exactly. Before a pack embarks on a hunt, they don't just wake up, stretch, and start running. They engage in this chaotic, highly physical ritual.
Right. They swarm together, they're vocalizing with those high-pitched squeaks, and they aggressively lick each other's muzzles and noses.
Yes, lots of muzzle licking.
But, I was reading this and thinking, from a purely caloric standpoint, jumping around and vocalizing before a grueling marathon hunt seems like a massive waste of energy. Like, why burn the calories?
It's a great question. And the answer is that the behavioral return on investment is worth that caloric cost. This ceremony is a vital social reset button.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine two dogs had a minor dispute over, say, a shaded resting spot a few hours prior.
Okay. A little argument.
Right. If they carry that agitation into a hunt for a zebra, their synchronization is compromised. And as we established, that means starvation.
Right, because someone misses a cue in the relay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the muzzle licking, which actually mimics the food-begging behavior of puppies, it triggers the release of endorphins and oxytocin.
Oh, wow. So it's a literal chemical dampener.
Yes. It chemically dampens internal grievances. By the time the ceremony ends, the hierarchy is reaffirmed and the pack is psychologically bound together.
They're paying a small energetic tax up front to ensure the hunting mechanism doesn't misfire. That is incredible.
It's a perfect system for their environment.
But as flawlessly cooperative as they are on the savannah, our sources also dive into the terrifyingly pragmatic side of this survival strategy. Because maintaining this perfect, unified biological machine, it comes with a brutal cost.
It does, a very high cost.
Specifically regarding reproduction, right?
Yes, the reproductive psychology of the African wild dog is governed by strict, uncompromising resource management. In these packs, reproduction is almost exclusively monopolized by the alpha male and the alpha female.
And the sources detail that if a subordinate female manages to breed and have puppies, the alpha female will often seek out and kill that subordinate's litter.
Yeah, you will.
And on a human level, that sounds... it sounds psychopathic. It sounds like a malicious abuse of power by the alpha.
It does sound that way to us. But we have to completely divorce human morality from evolutionary mechanics here. Because what's fascinating here is that it isn't malice. It is mathematics.
Mathematics. Okay, explain that.
The savanna is a harsh, unforgiving environment, right? And the pack operates on a razor-thin caloric margin.
But wait, evolutionarily speaking, wouldn't a larger pack with more members be safer and more effective? Like, why wouldn't the pack just expand their hunting radius, catch more prey, and support both litters of puppies? Wouldn't more dogs equal more hunting power eventually?
That's a very logical assumption. But it ignores a massive biological bottleneck. And that bottleneck is regurgitation.
Regurgitation, right?
Yeah, African wild dogs don't drag a carcass back to the den. If they tried, it would be stolen by hyenas or lions almost immediately.
Yeah, of course, too many scavengers.
Right. So instead, the adults gorge themselves at the kill site, they sprint back to the den, and they regurgitate the meat for the puppies. Now, an adult wild dog's stomach can only physically hold so much meat.
Ah, I see where this is going. So there is a hard physical cap on the carrying capacity of the pack.
Precisely. A pack of 10 adults can only physically transport enough calories in their stomachs to sustain one litter of highly demanding, fast-growing puppies. If two females have litters simultaneously, the pack's regurgitated resources are divided in half.
And splitting the calories means all the puppies from both litters are malnourished.
Yes, and the entire next generation of the pack could die.
Wow. Okay, so the alpha female's instinct to eliminate the subordinate's litter, it's not evil. It actually guarantees that 100% of the pack's caloric transport goes directly to her genetics.
Exactly. It's a brutal, calculated mechanism to prevent systemic starvation. It highlights the extreme pressures of being a pack predator. Being a pack animal isn't just about, the warmth of companionship. It is a highly regulated, sometimes ruthless system of survival.
That really redefines the concept of the pack for me. And, to manage that intense hierarchy and to coordinate those life or death hunts, these animals need incredibly clear ways to communicate. We mentioned the high-pitched squeaks and the muzzle licking, but what happens when an animal's physical biology simply doesn't allow it to speak that same language?
Well, that brings us to one of the most fascinating taxonomic corrections in modern comparative ethology. We have to look at Cuon alpinus.
The dhole, right, or the Asiatic wild dog.
Yes, the dhole.
Yeah.
Native to the forests and mountains of Central, South, and Southeast Asia.
And our sources point out this historical scientific mystery, which is so cool. For decades, there was this prominent theory that the dhole was the direct ancestor of the dingo in Australia.
It was a very neat, geographically convenient theory. I mean, they share similar physical profiles, similar reddish coats, and the land bridge migration theories made it a plausible evolutionary narrative.
Sure, it makes sense on paper.
But modern ethologists have entirely severed that branch of the family tree. The dhole is not the ancestor of the dingo, and they're only very, very distantly related to the domestic dog.
But wait, how can scientists just cross an animal off the family tree like that? Is it just DNA sequencing? Because I think my first instinct is to assume a scientist in a lab just ran a genetic test and found a mismatch.
You'd think so, right? But the actual aha moment, the definitive proof that changed the ethological consensus, wasn't DNA. It was based entirely on observing a single facial expression.
Here's where it gets really interesting. One single facial expression solved an evolutionary cold case.
Exactly. It all comes down to the mechanics of the threat display. You see, a facial expression in a wild animal isn't just a mood. It is an innate motor pattern.
Okay, let's define that for the listeners because that is crucial. Every time your dog at home feels threatened or wants to signal a warning, what do?
They pull their lips back, they wrinkle the top of their snout, and they bare their canine teeth.
Right, and they don't learn how to do that, right? Like a wolf puppy raised in complete isolation will still wrinkle its snout when it's threatened.
Exactly. That specific sequence of muscle contractions is an innate motor pattern. It's hardwired into their neurological circuitry. When the brain registers a specific type of stress, the electrical signal travels down a very specific neural pathway to those specific facial muscles.
It's as involuntary and hardwired as, like, a human pupil dilating in the dark.
Precisely. It's a piece of deeply embedded biological code that all members of the Canis genus share. Wolves, coyotes, jackals, domestic dogs, they all do it.
But the dhole does something totally different.
Yes. When ethologists observed the dhole under stress, they witnessed a fundamentally different innate motor pattern. When a dhole wants to signal a threat, it does not wrinkle its upper lip. It does not bare its teeth in a snarl.
Instead, it threatens by opening its jaws incredibly wide, right? Like exposing the entire inside of its mouth in this massive gape.
Exactly, like a snake almost.
It just unhinges its jaw and flashes its entire mouth. That is completely alien to how a wolf or a dog operates.
Because the neurological wiring is completely different. The dhole's brain sends the threat signal to an entirely different set of muscles. And we connect this to the bigger picture because these motor patterns take millions of years to evolve and become fixed in a species' DNA. Finding such a drastic difference proves a massive evolutionary divergence.
It's like realizing someone isn't actually your cousin because they have a totally different biological reflex. You take them to the doctor taps their knee with a hammer, and their arm jerks instead of their leg. You instantly know, okay, your neurological wiring is fundamentally different from mine. We are not closely related.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes, and it highlights a crucial spectrum in comparative ethology. On one end, you have the highly social animals, the wolves, the African wild dogs, that require these incredibly complex, nuanced facial expressions to manage their intense pack dynamics.
Right, they need a huge vocabulary of faces. But evolution is notoriously stingy, right? It doesn't build complex systems if it doesn't have to.
No, it conserves energy wherever possible.
So if we want to understand the baseline of canoed communication, we have to look at the exact opposite end of that spectrum. We've looked at the highly social animals. Now let's look at the complete opposite. The introverts of the wild world who barely need to speak. at all.
We have to examine the foxes.
The foxes. If wild dogs are the extroverts organizing the massive school dance, foxes are the kids happily reading a book alone in the corner.
Exactly, because foxes are solitary. They are lone operatives. They don't form large packs, they don't coordinate massive takedowns of large prey, and they generally only interact briefly for mating or raising their young.
And that solitary lifestyle, it completely dictates their physical biology, doesn't it?
Completely. Because they live alone, the evolutionary pressure to develop a complex system of communication is essentially zero. As a result, foxes possess a remarkably poor nonverbal syntax.
Meaning their facial expressions?
Right. Their facial mimicry is incredibly primitive compared to a dog or a wolf.
Which, again, makes perfect caloric sense. Like, if you're by yourself, you don't need a huge vocabulary of emojis or facial expressions to tell someone how you're feeling. If you spend your entire life alone in the woods, why would your body waste energy developing 30 different intricate facial muscles just to express, like, mild annoyance or subtle submissiveness? There is literally no one there to read your face.
Exactly. If a fox encounters a threat, it doesn't need a facial expression with 5 escalating degrees of intensity to negotiate a social hierarchy. It has 2 basic options: fight or flee.
Right. The complex social machinery simply isn't required.
So the physical machinery, the actual facial muscles and the neural pathways to control them, they never fully developed, or they eventually atrophied over evolutionary time.
The fox gives us the perfect biological control group. It shows us what a canine looks like when you strip away the need for teamwork. But the fox is also the protagonist of what is arguably one of the most famous science experiments of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
An experiment that literally shows us how a wild predator transforms into a house pet in real time. We have to talk about the Russian silver fox experiment.
Yes. Initiated by the geneticist Dmitry Belyaev in the 1950s. This experiment is foundational to our understanding of domestication.
So Belyaev was operating in Soviet Russia, taking these captive silver foxes and breeding them. But he wasn't breeding them for traditional agricultural traits, right? Like, he didn't care about the quality of their fur, and he didn't care about their physical size.
No, he didn't care about any of the typical commercial traits. He selected for one single psychological trait: tameness
Mm.
or friendliness.
Okay, how do you even measure that in a wild fox?
The methodology was incredibly simple but rigorously applied.
Mm.
Belyaev and his team would approach the fox cages and basically measure their flight distance and their aggressive responses. Did the fox cower? Did it snarl? Did it try to bite the glove?
Right.
They took only the foxes that showed the least amount of fear and the lowest propensity to bite, and they bred them together.
And then they just repeated that with the next generation. They just kept filtering for friendliness. Now, obviously, getting friendly foxes out of this process makes sense, but the mind-blowing part, the part that completely rewrites how we understand our dogs, is what happened to their bodies.
This is where we encounter the mechanism of pleiotropy.
Pleiotropy, okay, definition time.
It's the phenomenon where a single gene or genetic pathway influences multiple, seemingly unrelated phenotypic traits. So Belyaev was only selecting for a change in brain chemistry, right? He wanted foxes with lower adrenaline and lower fear responses.
Right. It makes total sense that their behavior changed, but our sources note that their physical bodies began to mutate. Their coat colors changed, they developed these white piebald patches, their tails started to curl up over their backs, and their ears became floppy.
Yes, it is entirely counterintuitive.
Like, how does breeding for a behavioral trait like tameness accidentally alter physical cartilage and hair pigment?
The answer lies in the embryo, specifically in a cluster of cells known as neural crest cells.
Neural crest cells. Okay.
During embryonic development, these neural crest cells act like a migratory construction crew. They start near the spinal cord and migrate throughout the body to form various tissues.
Okay, so they travel around the embryo, basically building different parts of the animal.
Exactly. Crucially, these cells are responsible for forming the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands dictate the fear and aggression response.
Okay, tracking so far.
But that same exact migratory crew of cells is also responsible for forming melanocytes, which give the coat its color, and they form the cartilage in the ears and the jawbone.
Wait, really? Oh, wow. So the systems are biologically linked from the very beginning.
Yes. When Belyaev selected foxes with lower adrenaline, he was inadvertently selecting foxes with mild deficits in their neural crest cells.
Because the construction crew was weakened to lower the adrenaline, it also didn't quite finish its other jobs.
Exactly. It didn't deliver the pigment properly, resulting in those white patches. It didn't stiffen the ear cartilage, resulting in floppy ears. It didn't grow the jaw fully, resulting in shorter, more dog-like snouts.
That is absolutely staggering. You pull one single behavioral thread, just don't bite the human, and the entire biological system unravels and knits itself into a new physical shape.
Is the unifying theory of domestication. It proves that the physical traits we associate with domestic dogs, the floppy ears, the varied coat colors, the juvenile faces, they were not intentionally bred by our ancestors thousands of years ago.
Right, cavemen weren't trying to breed a cute, floppy-eared wolf.
No. They are merely the unavoidable physical byproducts of a wolf becoming less aggressive toward humans.
So the wolves basically domesticated themselves by choosing to scavenge near human campfires. And because the least aggressive ones got the most food, their neural crest cells shifted and they accidentally turned into dogs.
Exactly. Domestication isn't just taming an animal, it's fundamentally altering its developmental biology.
You change the brain, you accidentally change the body. This is why comparative ethology is so powerful. But, before we pull all these threads together, our sources take us to the absolute fringes of the canid family tree.
The extreme outliers.
Yes. We've seen how socialization and domestication shape biology, but we also have to look at the extreme outliers, the animals that prove how wildly the basic canine blueprint can be stretched when you drastically change the environment.
We have to start with the Ethiopian wolf, Canis simensis.
Yeah, let's talk about them.
This is a highly specialized, critically endangered canis living in a very specific, unforgiving habitat.
And the sources mention this long-standing rumor in the canine world regarding the Ethiopian wolf. Because they have these incredibly long legs, slender bodies, and extremely elongated snouts, a lot of people believe they were the ancient direct ancestors of our modern sighthounds like greyhounds or Seleucus.
Right. Visually, this silhouette is nearly identical.
It is.
Visually, it's a very compelling theory. But biologically and ethologically, it is a classic example of convergent evolution. It's not a direct ancestral link.
Ah.
They look like greyhounds, not because they are related, but because their specific environment forced them to adopt a similar aerodynamic frame for a completely different purpose.
Right, because if you look at their actual behavior, they aren't sprinting across flat deserts at 40 miles an hour to chase down gazelles like a greyhound. They live in the high-altitude Afro-alpine regions, and their primary prey is mole rats.
Yes, they are highly specialized rodent hunters. That incredibly long, narrow snout isn't for cutting through the wind during a sprint. It's an evolutionary tool designed specifically to reach deep into narrow rodent burrows among the rocks.
It's basically a pair of biological tweezers attached to a canine brain.
Precisely. It highlights how the environment shapes the tool. And if we want to see an even more dramatic example of environmental shaping, we look at the maned wolf of South America, Crocusayan brachyurus.
Okay, the maned wolf. I have to say, this animal looks like it was generated by artificial intelligence. It looks like a standard red fox, but it is standing on stilt-like supermodel legs. It is bizarre.
It really is. And taxonomically, it's equally unique. It belongs to its own entirely different genus. It's further removed from dogs than even the coyote. It is not a wolf, and it is not a fox. It's a very distant survivor of Pleistocene canids. But its morphology, those incredibly long legs, tells an amazing story of environmental adaptation.
Let me guess. The long legs aren't for sustained running either.
No, not at all. The Mader wolf lives in the Cerrado, which are these vast, tall grass savannas of Brazil and neighboring countries.
Okay.
If a standard-sized canid tried to navigate that environment, it would be completely blind to predators and prey. The stilt-like legs evolved to elevate the animal's head above the tall grass, allowing it to survey its territory.
So it's literally an observation tower on legs. That is so cool. And their diet is just as surprising as their appearance.
It is entirely counterintuitive for a wild canid.
Yeah.
While they do hunt small mammals and insects, a massive percentage of their diet, sometimes over 50%, consists of fruit.
Fruit.
It's basically the lobera, or the wolf apple.
A fruit-eating, stilt-walking canid. It proves that the basic software of a dog is incredibly malleable. Like, you put them in tall grass, they grow stilts and eat fruit. You put them in the mountains, they grow tweezers and eat rats.
The adaptability is truly remarkable. And the sources briefly highlight two final outliers that further demonstrate this. The raccoon dog and the Corsac fox.
Oh, right. The raccoon dog, which is native to East Asia and looks exactly like a raccoon that swallowed a small dog.
It's a basal canid, meaning it retains very primitive evolutionary traits. And one of the most fascinating aspects of the raccoon dog is its metabolic adaptation. It's the only canid known to hibernate.
Wait, really? A hibernating dog?
Or more accurately, enter a state of prolonged torpor during harsh winters. Yes,
That's crazy.
while wolves and foxes have to constantly hunt through the freezing winter, the raccoon dog lowers its body temperature and metabolic rate, surviving entirely on stored fat reserves. It's a completely different survival strategy that required a massive metabolic divergence from the rest of the family tree.
Wow. And then there's the Corsac fox, wandering the arid steppes of Central Asia.
Yes, the Corsac fox is a prime example of hypernomadism. Unlike a red fox that might establish a relatively stable territory, the Corsac fox is highly migratory. They live in environments where food and water sources are incredibly unpredictable.
So they just keep moving.
Right, and they've evolved to survive without drinking standing water for extended periods, getting all their moisture from their prey. They constantly move, following the erratic boom and bust cycles of rodent populations across the steppes.
So we have traveled the globe on this deep dive. We've analyzed the hyper-coordinated acoustic ecology of the African wild dog. We've uncovered the innate motor patterns of the toll's threat face. We've traced the embryonic neural crest cells of the domesticated fox, and we have marveled at hibernating raccoon dogs and fruit-eating maned wolves.
We have looked at the extreme limits of the comparative ethology spectrum, yes.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring it all back to the living room. How does understanding the caloric bottleneck of a wild dog pack or the facial muscles of a solitary fox actually help you, the listener, understand the pet sleeping on your couch right now?
Well, it culminates in the golden rule of comparative ethology established by our sources. And that rule is, the more intense the social life of a species, the richer its nonverbal syntax.
So the complexity of their communication perfectly matches the complexity of their social lives.
Exactly. When you look at the solitary fox, you see an animal with primitive facial mimicry because it has absolutely no evolutionary need to negotiate a complex social hierarchy.
Right.
When you look at the African wild dog, you see an animal that relies on intense greeting rituals, submissive squeaks, and appeasement behaviors just to prevent a highly volatile, highly stressed group from destroying itself from the inside.
And when you look at the domestic dog,
You are looking at the absolute pinnacle of cross-species communication. Domestic dogs possess an incredibly sophisticated, highly nuanced array of facial expressions, body postures, tail mechanics, and ear movements.
they really do.
And they didn't just inherit the complex pack mentality and innate motor patterns of their wild ancestors. The very process of domestication, the shifting of those neural crest cells we talked about, actually lengthened their socialization periods. It kept their brains plastic and hyper-receptive to new social cues.
So they are biologically engineered to read the room.
Exactly.
So for you listening, next time your dog gives you that specific guilty look after destroying a throw pillow, or they wag their tail in that very specific full-body helicopter motion when you walk through the door, I want you to realize the sheer weight of what you are witnessing. You aren't just looking at a cute pet performing a trick. You are looking at millions of years of survival instincts.
You're seeing the exact same deep-rooted necessity to cooperate that drives an African wild dog to share regurgitated food on the savannah. The domestic dog possesses a massive, ancient, hardwired instinct to cooperate within a team structure.
And the incredible part is, you are their team. You are the pack. They are deploying an arsenal of evolutionary tools, tools that were forged in life or death struggles in the wild, simply to maintain peace, cohesion, and affection with you in your living room.
It completely reframes the human-animal bond. They are not merely begging for treats, they're executing a highly complex social ritual to ensure the survival of your specific cross-species group.
Which is such a beautiful, profound way to view the animal in your house. But as we wrap up, I know you always like to leave us with a lingering question. Based on all this biological software we've unpacked today, what is the final thought we should be mulling over?
Well, it's a paradox that modern ethologists are still wrestling with. We know that our dog's incredibly complex facial expressions and body language evolved initially to communicate with other canines in a high-stakes wild environment, wolves coordinating a hunt or managing a strict hierarchy.
Right. The code was written by wolves for wolves.
Yes, but today they use those exact same expressions, the raised inner eyebrows, the flattened ears, the specific tempo of a tail wag, to communicate directly with us. We even know they have developed specific muscles, like the AU101 muscle that gives them puppy dog eyes, which wolves do not possess.
So they have hardware specifically for us.
Which raises the ultimate question. When you and your dog look at each other and understand one another, are you learning to speak their ancient wild language? Or have they spent the last several thousand years hacking our biology, learning to speak human?
Have they weaponized their evolutionary adaptability to manipulate our mammalian nurturing instincts? That is brilliant. Are we observing their natural language, or are they translating it on the fly to get us to open the treat jar? I mean, I am going to be analyzing every single look my dog gives me for the rest of the week, trying to figure out who is actually managing who. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We started by tearing up the biological blueprint and looking at the wildest, most remote members of the canid family tree, and somehow we ended up right back on the couch, realizing that the animal sitting next to us is a masterclass in evolutionary survival and communication. Keep questioning the amazing world around you, keep looking closely at the animals you think you know, and we will see you on the next deep dive.